I already wrote an article outlining some basic thoughts on this topic. However, I figured it would be appropriate to also discuss the video which inspired me to think about this issue in the first place. You see, for those unaware, Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian over at the Young Turks have been making a greater push to reach out to Trump supporters on issues where we have common ground and possibly even convert them to our ideology. And I just want to say real quick, there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And I just want to be very clear, I have absolutely nothing against that idea. I would love nothing more than if every single person who supported Trump could be convinced otherwise. In fact, some of my favorite left-wingers make it a point to do exactly that. Nathan Robinson, for example, does exactly that through combining a very friendly demeanor with simplistic and often humorous prose, even while he's discussing complex ideas. It makes his work incredibly accessible, and I'd argue downright fun to read at points. His book, Responding to the Right, Brief Replies to 25 Conservative Arguments, even gives its readers short, snappy, digestible responses to right-wing ideas. Robinson even dedicated the book to open-minded conservatives willing to have their ideas challenged. If that's not willingness to reach across the aisle, I honestly don't know what is. Even just on working with them on areas we already agree, I personally would gladly do so on the condition it was a temporary alliance and we actually got something out of it. Albeit, I also think it's probably a smarter move to start politicizing people who are not currently political over trying to convert people who are already political. Albeit, I don't really have much of an empirical basis for that. It just makes more sense to me, intuitively. This is not to say you can't do both, by the way. I'm just saying I think one should be emphasized more than the other. However, this commentary is not made to discuss my own opinion regarding strategy for the left moving forward. Instead, it's because Cenk Uygur keeps saying things that are wrong, or is doing things that are rather foolish. Like asking Elon Musk if he could be put in charge of the Pentagon, since he could slash $400 billion from its budget easily. Then when Elon Musk gave him a very basic stock response, he said on Twitter that it's evidence that these people are more inclusive than Democratic leadership who have never done the same to him. For those curious, this partnership went absolutely nowhere. Here's Cenk saying that he went on a bunch of different right-wing shows, and they all agreed we should cut the Pentagon, prevent generals from working for defense contractors, and Edward Snowden should be pardoned. Hey Cenk, do you happen to remember who it was that gave Julian Assange a plea deal that allowed him to avoid being imprisoned in the United States? And who was it that commuted the entirety of Chelsea Manning's prison sentence again? Here's Cenk in December talking about how Trump winning means the establishment is defeated, and now we might finally get cuts to the Pentagon, conflict of interest rules, and a pardon of Edward Snowden.
But I am weirdly optimistic and hopeful now after the election, not because I'm happy that Trump won, but because the establishment is defeated. And the establishment is immovable. And they never would free Edward Snowden. They would never cut the Pentagon. They never do. They would never have conflict of interest rules because they think, oh my God, if we do it for the generals, maybe they're going to think about doing it for the politicians. And the politician, oh my God, how would I feed my family if I can't make millions of dollars after I retired being a lobbyist and a consultant and all these things?
Of course, if Donald Trump really had any interest in doing all of this progressive reform of the military, he had the ability to do so during his first term as president and yet never did. Forcing one to wonder why exactly Cenk thinks this term is going to be different. Here's Cenk last year talking about Steve Bannon's desire to raise taxes on the wealthy as if it's some kind of development. This was part of a larger point about how we should work with MAGA on issues we have common ground on, which I've already somewhat discussed. But I just need to highlight this real quick.
They are correct about that. And the fact that they are telling right-wing voters in this battle, remember, watch out for the donor class, watch out for the corporate executives.
True, yeah.
Is really important. So as much as I loathe Bannon and Loomer on those things that I have every right to loathe them on, it is super interesting and important, and yes, I'm gonna say it, positive, that they are saying, watch out for the donor class, watch out for corporate rule. I mean, Steve Bannon the other day said we need to increase corporate taxes dramatically. We need to raise taxes on the rich, and those folks need to help pay for the things that helps the average American.
As if that hasn't been an opinion of Bannon's for years, to the point where TYT has even covered that previously. Fuck, Jank covered that previously.
Steve Bannon has told colleagues he wants the top income tax bracket to have a 4 in front of it. The top bracket is currently 39.6% for Americans who earn more than $418,400. What? So Steve Bannon wants to raise taxes on the rich. Fascinating. Okay.
Here's Jank talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene, beginning the conversation by saying that so many people didn't want him to have her on, before showing that actually the majority of his viewers did want her on, while praising her for opposing war in Iran, Iraq, and Vietnam for some reason.
You know, we're living very interesting times because a lot of people on the left say, don't even have Marjorie Taylor Greene on. And you know, if you do, you got to yell at her, etc. And so we asked our audience, Representative Greene, on our website tyt.com, whether we should have you on. And it looks like, what is that? 82% say yes. And here you are. And once you come on, it turns out, oh wait, you agree with us on Iran, and by the way, you agree with us on Vietnam and Iraq.
Never mind that Jank has had David Duke on before, so it's not as if it's unusual for him to have incredibly far-right guests on his show if he believes it to be worthwhile. Genuinely, I have no idea who exactly would be a fan of his while also disliking the idea of him talking to Greene. I'm not saying they don't exist, but can I get some names, please, or examples? And I haven't even touched on that time he said the Young Turks should buy MSNBC, a proposal that went about as far as when he asked Elon if he could be put in charge of the Pentagon. Nor is this discussing Rebellion PAC. Actually, you know what? I'm going to give that a little bit of time. Here's Jank introducing it back in April.
Big announcement today. We are launching a populist takeover of the Democratic Party. We're doing it through a Rebellion PAC, rebellionpac.com. So what does that mean? First of all, what are we concentrating on? Economic populism. So we are going to find candidates, and we already have, and I'll tell you who some of those candidates are, that believe in doing real populism, not the kind of fake populism that Donald Trump and Elon Musk did, and obviously not the establishment. So we're at the very center of the Democratic Party. The 6 policy proposals are incredibly popular. They all poll over 2/3. They're the most popular positions the Democratic Party has. And so our revolutionary idea is, why don't we do them first? And let's get a giant coalition to do this. And we're planting our flag and saying we think the Democratic Party should go towards economic populism.
Of course, Jank already did this back in 2017. That's what the Justice Democrats were. And by the way, Justice Democrats currently has 9 people in Congress, including some rather big players in the modern DNC like Ro Khanna, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Pramila Jayapal. You can have criticisms of the organization, and don't get me wrong, I certainly think it has strayed away in some regards from Uyghur's original vision, and feel the movement hasn't been as successful as he clearly first pitched it to be. However, it's doing pretty decently, all things considered, given quite a few big names in politics are currently associated with it. Rebellion PAC has, well, first off, a far worse designed website, but also only 3 candidates to its name at the moment, one of which being the aforementioned Ro Khanna, along with Richard Ojeda and Randy Bryce, whose website might actually be worse given this is the only page on it. Seriously, it has 2 links to email him along with a place where you can donate to him through ActBlue, because they're taking on the establishment, you see, but no policies from him of any kind. Seriously though, just to really emphasize how bad Rebellion PAC's website is, friend of the show Pocasonic Legends noticed when we went through this website that there were several pages where the logo blended into the background. Still, over on their store, you can buy mug with color inside. Add a splash of color to your morning coffee or tea ritual. These ceramic mugs not only have a beautiful design on them, but also a colorful rim, handle, and inside, so the mug is bound to spice up your mug rack. For those curious, yes, this is literally just placeholder text. I quite literally found that same text on a different website which sells a different mug incredibly easily. This mug is also $7.50 cheaper for those curious. However, with all of that said, let's actually get into the video I'm supposed to be covering.
Trump has done some positive things today, which is a bit shocking. We'll see if it holds.
Brace for impact. Right?
Yeah, I know. Oh my God. So I've been getting yelled at online all day.
So what's new?
I know, right? What you're saying that Trump enforcing a ceasefire against Israel is a good thing? No, boo! We don't want Israel to have a ceasefire. No, but wait, we do want Israel to comply with a ceasefire. No, you have to hate Trump anyway.
Full disclosure, I looked and I have no idea what exactly Cenk is talking about here. And he doesn't cite a specific statement he made regarding this topic or name drop anybody giving him backlash, so the audience is just immediately left confused.
They're not, and it's hard to make sense of how things are changing and realigning. We'll talk about this tomorrow, so I have time to produce it, but Candace Owens was on Piers Morgan today for a one-on-one interview. That interview blew my mind, okay? Because everything she said was accurate. Everything she said was true. And everything she said is reminiscent of what you would hear from a left-wing show arguing against essentially aiding and abetting Israel in its genocide in Gaza, for instance.
Sure, but there's a clear difference between somebody saying that while also being a progressive versus somebody saying it who has also said, for example, this.
But if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to look a different way.
TYT covered this at the time, by the way, both when Owens originally made the statement and when it was played by Ted Lieu at a congressional hearing she was at. And by the way, it's not as if TYT hasn't called her anti-Semitic more recently. For fuck's sake, they ran 2 different segments calling her that last year. Kasparian even points out that Candace Owens defended Kanye West later in the same interview she's talking about.
So on that interview, there was times where Candace went too far.
Yes, supporting Kanye West and all that nasty
Oh yeah,
stuff.
I didn't even get to that part.
Yeah.
No, that's a disaster.
A person who TYT has specifically covered the history of Hitler appraisal from.
A business executive who worked for West, who now goes by Ye, good for him, told CNN that the artist created a hostile work environment in part through his obsession with Hitler. He would praise Hitler by saying how incredible it was that he was able to accumulate so much power, and would talk about all the great things he and the Nazi Party achieved for the German people, the individual told CNN. 4 sources told CNN that West had originally suggested the title for his 2018 album to be Hitler. That was eventually released as Ye. So I guess those are interchangeable for him. They did not want to be named, citing concern for professional retribution. Van Lathan Jr., a former TMZ employee, recently claimed on a podcast that West also made anti-Semitic comments during their conversation that the outlet did not release publicly. When Kanye came to TMZ, he said that stuff and they took it out of the interview. He said something like, "I love Hitler, I love Nazis," something to that effect when he was there. And they took it out of the interview for whatever reason. It was not my decision.
I also want to point out this contradiction real quick.
And I do think that there's a contingent on the right, voters, and yes, a few media folks who are sick of the regime change wars. They're sick of the forever wars, and they're not full of crap, okay? Because they literally say things publicly that could ruin them, but they say it anyway.
Candace Owens is not going to be ruined anytime soon. She's almost certainly going to always find some group of people willing to platform her. Especially in the internet era where it's much more difficult to fully get rid of somebody due to the various forms of communication they can use. For reference, the episode of Piers Morgan Owens appeared on that's being talked about here also had Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly on it. Two people who were forced off of Fox News. In O'Reilly's case for sexual harassment, and in Beck's case because his conspiracy theories were causing advertisers to begin boycotting his show. And by the way, Anna understands this entire reasoning is at least somewhat fallacious, given she mocks the idea of Candace being normalized.
Guys, this is last thing here. Simple concept, but it hasn't been treated as a simple concept. You can agree with some things and disagree with other things about a person. And I'm saying it like I'm almost being patronizing, right? I get it. But that's because so many people say back, no, you can't. You know, you either have to be 100% for Trump or 100% against Trump. Same thing for Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, etc. If you even give them credit on a thing where they're agreeing with you, no, that's toxic, terrible, normalizes, blah, blah, blah. They make up a bunch of words.
There's
you're
no
legitimizing,
There's
platforming.
no normalizing, okay?
Right.
Candace Owens, it has been normalized, okay? She has a
Whether we like
massive
it or not.
audience,
Yeah.
massive platform. There's nothing Cenk and I can do that further normalizes Candace Owens. She's wildly popular.
So she's totally normalized, but she could also lose her career for her comments about Israel. And by the way, Candace Owens did lose her platform on the Daily Wire because of her rhetoric. Make no mistake, it's not like there's been no consequence for her doing this. But her career appears to be chugging along perfectly fine without any sort of issue, despite her recent end to this business relationship.
Yeah, so I'll say it. They had a whole giant Piers Morgan episode about this massive split in MAGA. But I went on Kyle and Crystal just a couple of days ago, and they think there's no split at all.
Probably because that episode hadn't aired yet. The Kyle, Crystal, and Friends episode that Cenk Uygur was on aired on June 21st, 2025. Meanwhile, the Piers Morgan Uncensored episode you're referring to didn't air until the 24th, 3 days later.
No, there's definitely a split, right?
But that's what they said. So I don't know if they're on this planet. And when I asked them if they're on this planet, they seem to get mad and they...
Okay, I checked the episode and there were two different points where Cenk said something similar to this. In the first instance, after Cenk finishes speaking, Crystal turns the question back on him in a manner that doesn't sound all that angry.
With everything that's happened in Trump 2.0, do you still feel that original optimism that you expressed at the time, do you still feel that was well-founded?
Absolutely. And the part of the reason I wanted to come on is to see if you guys are on planet Earth or live in an alternate reality. And I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm being genuine about it. And Chris, I went back and watched our conversation from back then.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you kept saying like things against Trump. And that's why I didn't even think it was a debate. It was a discussion because I was like, yeah, I totally agree with you on Trump and the Republicans, et cetera. I was talking about the populist right and the independents that voted for Trump. the actual voters. And you saw it in that clip. I don't address Trump. I don't address any Republicans. I address the voters. So what has happened since then? Joe Rogan has come out against what Trump has done with Mahmoud Halil, with Abrego Garcia. Almost all of the MAGA hosts have come out against the war, ranging from Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon. Then you've got the politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene. You've got Tim Dillon. I'm not sure you can name a right-wing MAGA host or independent host that's for the war in Iran. So I'm genuinely curious. Like, are you guys not seeing that, or does that somehow magically not count?
So, Cenk, I have the same question as to whether or not you're on planet Earth.
And the second time such a question is asked, in a clearly mocking nature, by the way, it's Cenk who sounds agitated. Meanwhile, the next thing we hear from Crystal is her sounding collected and calm.
You have this fantasy land that Trump was like, oh, the left thinks Abrego Garcia's, I've treated him wrong. I surrender, left. Come on, what planet do you live on? No, the courts are not left or right. The courts have held. I'm thrilled that the courts have held. And it was so important for the courts to hold. So if they didn't hold on that, he was going to have unlimited authoritarian power. And we are against that, no matter how many times people try to pretend that we're on the side of Trump. Listen to what I am actually saying, and you will see this every day on the Young Turks. I am against Trump. Totally. Okay. Now, okay. Yes, but why do you love Trump will be the next question. Okay.
Did I ask that? Cenk,
okay.
Talk
So
about a
now,
straw man. You're making up stuff I never said.
And they're, by the way, to be fair to them, they're representing their audience, and their audience doesn't see it at all. That's because they're not getting accurate information.
Well,
like, if you think there's no MAGA split in the country, you're a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
So hold on.
Kyle's covered this MAGA split you're talking about, though. Kyle specifically ran a segment on the topic of an interview Ted Cruz had with Tucker Carlson, where Carlson criticizes his support for more aggressive foreign policy regarding Iran. Although Kyle also makes it clear that he does not believe this is going to cause any sort of rift between Carlson and Trump for various different reasons he elaborates on in the segment.
So Tucker Carlson has been tepidly against war with Iran. He just did an interview with Steve Bannon the other day, and it was very clear that he's against war with Iran. But the way he frames his arguments does kind of trigger me, if I'm being honest with you. And the way Sloppy Steve does also triggers me. Because literally, in the context of arguing against war with Iran, he still tries to suck Trump off. So, oh, Trump's a good man. He has a good heart. I think in his heart of hearts, he doesn't want this war, and he's being misled and this and that. And honestly, that's bullshit. Trump's a warmonger. He's always been a warmonger. He was a warmonger in his first term. Now he's a warmonger in his second term. So letting Trump off the hook is kind of unforgivable to me. Now, having said that, Trump the other day came after Tucker because he heard that Tucker was like against the Iran war, and he called him, somebody tell kooky Tucker Carlson that Iran can have a nuke. Now, that's just a fucking stupid thing to say because Iran doesn't have a nuke, they're not building a nuke, and Israel started the war. It was an illegal offensive strike from Israel that started this. Okay, now, here's the cucked part. You ready? Trump attacks Tucker. Tucker hasn't said shit in response. We're going on 2 or 3 days now. He hasn't said shit. He hasn't said shit yet. I'm waiting, Tucker, I'm waiting, right? And that's the problem, is that even when people from within MAGA try to maybe steer the boat in a slightly better direction, they can't do it in a real aggressive, truth-telling way. They know, ultimately, the movement bends the knee to the king, right? It is just incredible, the extent to which the Israel lobby has bought this government. But having said that, Tucker, your boy Donald Trump, who you support, took $100 million from Miriam Adelson for simply pro-Israel reasons. That's why he gave away the Golan Heights illegally to Israel in the first term. He let them annex the Golan Heights. That's why he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. That's why he did the Abraham Accords, which was a massive fuck you to Palestinians. That's why Trump said, we're going to take over Gaza, we're going to own Gaza. That's why the quid pro quo is, he's going to let Israel take over the entire West Bank. Because your boy, too, is fucking bought by these people. What do you not... But look, as I said, man, Trump attacked Tucker. Tucker has said nothing back to this point, as of the recording of this video. I hope he does say something back, but to this point, he has not. What are you going to do, Tucker? What are you going to do? Because what an honest, principled person would do is say, like Dave Smith said, to be fair, he said, I apologize for supporting Trump, and he should be impeached over this. And I was wrong, right? That's what you got to say. And then the last piece of the puzzle is what? Now you got to crusade against the guy. Because if your whole thing was no war with Iran, well, Trump is bringing us to war with Iran. So are you going to break up with MAGA? And this is my main problem with all these MAGA commentators who sometimes break ranks a little bit, like Joe Rogan being on his show like, bro, I don't think it's a good idea to get rid of due process and stuff, bro. And everybody's like, oh, yay, Joe, what an independent iconoclast you are. And then within the same fucking show or the next show, he's right back to riding Trump's nuts. And doing but Democrats are actually worse, bro, or Democrats are the same. That's the fucking bullshit right there. So, what path are you going to take, Tucker? Unfortunately, I think we all know the answer to that.
Scrolling back a little further through his archive, you can see him covering this topic a few days before that segment, discussing people like Tim Dillon, who you mentioned in that clip, and Nick Fuentes, who broke with Trump on this topic. Albeit Fuentes didn't back Trump in 24, so exactly how big of a split this is can be debated. And similarly, throughout these videos, Kyle expresses why he does not believe this division to be meaningful.
So you have what is typically called the paleoconservative right, or the isolationist right, and they are, let's be kind and say, somewhat objecting. I say somewhat because they're so fucking tepid, because when Trump does some shit, he is the right. He is MAGA. So when he does some shit, to dissent from him is basically like excommunicating yourself from the cult. And so you can only dissent so much. So what you'll find is even people who disagree with regime change in Iran, they have to be very careful about it, to always pretend like, well, Trump didn't do anything wrong, and if anything, he was duped by bad actors, bro. So there's always some degree of bullshit among even the right-wing people who are anti-regime change in Iran. So I'm happy that there's some people within the right-wing movement who are saying, hey, I'm kind of against this, right? Like, okay, good. But, like I said, they have to give you a heaping dose of bullshit along with it and pretend like Trump wasn't down with this. He's always been fucking down with this. They always lose to the neocons because they can't actually have the argument with the hawks, because it comes down to, well, I kind of agree with your general worldview and I actually kind of like them, but I just don't think, I think strategically this is a bad idea, sir. He can't just say on moral terms, this is fucking wrong and we are the baddies and we need to stop and the people doing it need to be arrested. He can't do it because he's a right-winger. Again, look at how chicken shit that argument is. The lack of precision is it's not strategically sound, sir. Like, that's not, you're never going to win the argument until you start telling the fucking truth, which is, again, we started this war. We went on the offense. We were aggressive. Iran didn't attack Israel. They weren't planning on fucking attacking Israel. They're not even trying to build a nuke. We are just the baddies. It's that simple, right? But as I said, here's my guess. Ultimately, most of them will just fall in line behind whatever Trump ends up doing, but they'll pretend like, oh, Trump was duped by those around him again. That's what they'll do. So Trump will continue with this war path, and they'll somehow absolve him of the crimes, but keep going after the people around him for doing war with Iran. That's my guess. That's my guess.
But these days, like, if you're on the left and you're watching any of the other shows, you're not getting accurate information at all. They're telling you that the actual Trump voters are liars and they love war. That's not true at all, right? So that's, some of the Trump voters will do whatever Trump wants, but a lot of them are actually anti-war. And they're making it seem like almost all the other left-wing shows as if the most extreme MAGA guy represents all 77 million Trump voters. And if you believe that, then you'll hate them. Of course, you'll want to call them fascists and racists and Nazis and all those things.
Can I get something more specific than unnamed shows? Because as already established, this isn't true of Kyle's show at the very least. By the way, Kyle didn't say that all of MAGA was lying about being anti-war. He said specific leaders from within the movement who have shown skepticism of foreign interventionism had been proven to be dishonest.
And by the way, even on the Iran war thing, they're lying. They are lying. We literally have the quotes right here.
They're not.
Charlie Kirk is
No
already
way.
backpedaling. Quote, we must trust Trump in this situation. Steve Bannon, if Trump ultimately decides to bomb Iran's nuclear sites, MAGA would come around. That's not me speaking, that's Steve Bannon. The vast majority of the MAGA movement will go, look, we trust your judgment. We don't like it. In fact, we may hate it, but we'll get on board. Tucker Carlson called Trump and apologized, and he also said on his podcast with Steve Bannon,
you
quote,
guys
I
already
like
repeated
Israel. I don't talk about Gaza because my audience got mad at me. He said, quote, watching Donald Trump, who at his core is sincere about peace, I feel for President Trump, and he just has to roll with it. That is not true. What he's saying is not true. These are not allies. They will immediately start moving the goalposts as soon as Trump starts bombing Iran.
Here we go again.
You're going to get
Here we
this.
go
You're going to
again.
get, oh, he's getting bad advice from the neocons around him. It's not a big deal. It's a limited attack. It's defensive.
Yeah.
It's not offensive. This isn't like Iraq. There are no
we go.
boots on the ground. The only people who are sincere that I will grant you, Cenk, is libertarians, so Thomas Massey and Dave Smith, because libertarians have a track record, like Ron Paul did, of being very principled, but everybody in MAGA, or 99% of them, will bend the knee, just like 99% of the ones in Congress have already bent the knee. Even
Yeah,
Marjorie Taylor
they're already
Greene,
doing
who's
it.
saying things that are against the war, she's ultimately
can
not
I
signing onto
answer?
the bill to block the war.
Elsewhere, Crystal notes that many Trump supporters are not saying they're against war or foreign interventionism, and she has polling data to prove it.
The MAGA base, the minute that Trump says we're in a war with Iran, they are going to overwhelmingly back him
Well, give
because
the
they
numbers
have
already.
every single
You have
time.
the numbers
No, they're
already.
not.
So
Yeah,
give-
so put up 8. This is element 8, I believe, for us. These are the poll numbers. Now, there are other polls out there, I grant you, but this is among Trump 2024 voters. You ask them, do you support or oppose the U.S. providing offensive weapons to help Israel strike Iranian military targets? What we're doing now, 79% support. Do you support or oppose the U.S. taking its own direct military action, if necessary, to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons? That's exactly the framing that Trump is using right now. Support 72%. They are more pro-war. So are there some who, don't want to get in another foreign entanglement? Sure. But overwhelmingly, are they going to back an Iran war? Are they already backing an Iran war because Trump said so? 100%.
But that's maniacal. No, as you get closer to the middle, there's a lot of former Obama voters, former Bernie voters, anti-war voters, anti-establishment voters, and almost none of the other left-wing shows are acknowledging that. They're out in la-la land.
Can I get some names or evidence, please?
And honestly, yes, most of the other left-wing shows are totally lying to their audience. And they're saying, no, there's no split. They all will do whatever Trump wants. They're all the same voter. They're all hardcore MAGA, and they're all fascist. And by the way, as Kyle pointed at me and said, yes or no, is MAGA fascist? Well, what an asinine question. What do you mean by MAGA? What do you mean? And do you mean Trump voters? Because no, not all Trump voters are fascist. But if you say that on another left-wing show, they'll lose their minds.
That's not what happened in the conversation. Kyle wasn't upset with you for not declaring all 77,302,580 Donald Trump voters fascists. He was annoyed that you weren't describing certain people who agreed with Donald Trump taking fascistic actions as fascist. Here's the clip if you guys don't believe me.
But here's my issue. Let me ask you this question. Is MAGA a fascist movement? Just give me a yes or no.
That's an absurd framing, Kyle. That's mainstream media framing.
You can't say that MAGA is fascist. You can't. Wait. You really don't believe MAGA is fascist? You argued with Anna months ago where you said, yes, they are a fascist movement.
Okay, can I give you an actual intelligent answer instead of this dumbass yes or no?
Why?
So
it's a pretty simple question.
No, it's not a simple question.
It absolutely
because you're
is.
conflating things. So if you say, is Trump authoritarian enough that you should call him fascist? Yes. Okay. So that's why you guys keep conflating the voters with the politicians. If you say
if the leader of the movement is a fascist, then the movement is a fascist movement.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Cenk, we have mass kidnappings and abductions and human traffickings with no due process from ICE Gestapo thugs. They've raided schools, meatpacking facilities, farms, Home Depots, 7-Elevens, deported a 4-year-old with American citizen with cancer, arrested a woman who just gave birth.
I agree.
That's a fascist. If anybody who supports that, Cenk, is a fascist. They're a fascist. Say no due process, throw out the Constitution, that's fascism.
And Kyle said that the better strategy, and repeated online throughout, is we're going to win the left and liberals and then win the left. But that's what we've been trying to do, and we just lost twice to Trump doing that same exact strategy.
Yeah.
Both the Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris campaigns put far more effort into courting establishment conservatives than they did liberals or leftists. What you're saying now just doesn't make any sense.
The final thing I'll say is I became politicized in the lead up to the preemptive war in Iraq. And at that time, and for a long time after that, every single Republican, we're talking about voters, members of the media and the politicians, were neocons. Every single one of them. There wasn't an anti-war conservative to be found.
Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan would very much like to have a word with you. Final thoughts, I don't hate TYT at all, but I find this recent obsession of theirs to be worth criticizing, if only because it shows a certain disconnection from reality. Good night and good luck.